slavery was ushered in. And so if you take, if we just look at Nova Scotia here, when the loyalists came here, the white loyalists, the black loyalists, right? And some of the black loyalists were free, some of them were enslaved. But what you had was a context, was a social context in which the white people who came as loyalists were former slave masters. And indeed some of them were still slave masters. So what you had was a society in which the relations of slavery were re-inscribed. The customs of slavery were reproduced in this new society. So I'm sure you know that history, I don't need to go into that. So even though people were free legally, their social life was one of subjugation and oppression. And that is going to have, or that has had, an impact, tremendous impact on the generations throughout the years to present time. So what we're experiencing in our community is not something, sometimes we like to blame ourselves, if we don't only pull up ourselves by the bootstrap, if we only behave ourselves and all will be well. That's not true. Blaming ourselves isn't the answer. There is not a gun factory in the black community. I don't see a Smith & Wesson factory in any black community. So the question to ask is, where are the guns coming from? Who are making them? How are they entering the hands of our children? And governments must be held accountable. So in terms of grasping and creating this new vision, we have to be committed, we have to be resilient, and we have to think long term. I think one of the lessons that we learned from the civil rights movement is that the commitment and the resilience. I also would like to say, in terms of where are these guns coming from, and in terms of holding governments accountable, that if what was happening in our community, this violence, had been happening in a more privileged community, there would have been a national inquiry or provincial inquiry, right? There would have been some kind of inquiry. People would be wringing their hands and saying, what is happening to those poor little black children? And what's happening to the black community? Now, let's see what we can do. Let's have a strategy. In this era of post-capitalism, or poor people and black people have become redundant. It's no longer an industrial economy. We're in a technological economy. And therefore, that's why we see all these layoffs, places of work closing down. Not just in Canada, but all over the world. You look in Britain, in France, it's this, the working class. People are saying, we don't need this labor anymore. And if we don't need this labor, what are we going to do with this labor? What are we going to do when people need food, people need clothing, people are going to rebel? The unemployment in the black community is very, very high. Even in the best times, it has been high. And now in this post-capitalist era, it's gone through the roof. The flip side of that is that we see governments, federal governments, provincial governments, building super jails. There was a time when communities would say, we don't want a jail in our community. But now we see communities vying with each other, saying, yes, bring it here. Why? Because there's so much unemployment in that particular community. People have no work, people can't eat, people can't feed themselves, that the answer is a prison or a jail.